Montana Territory, 1883. The wind cut through Great Falls like a warning, snapping at the hem of Rosalie Finch's coat as she stepped off the stagecoach. Her hands trembled against the leather strap of her satchel, not from cold, though it was bitter, but from dread. She searched the platform for a man she had never met, a man she was meant to marry. She'd come west as a mail-order bride, clutching letters from a man named Cyrus Bell. He'd written of his land and cattle, how a woman like her could find comfort on his ranch. But the last letter had turned sharp, less about love, more about obedience. She should have stopped then. But with no family left in Ohio and no prospects, she boarded the stage anyway, praying he had only been tired or angry that day. What she saw waiting near the corral made her stomach twist. Cyrus Bell stood 6 feet tall, thick-chested with a beard that crawled halfway down his neck. His shirt was stained, eyes narrowed. He did not smile. Instead, he spat in the dirt and barked, "You're late." I came as soon as I could," Rosalie said, voice tight, heart hammering. He stepped close. "You're mine now. Understand." Before she could answer, a man behind her spoke, calm but firm. "That's no way to greet a lady." She turned and saw a cowboy standing a few feet away. He wore a long duster, hat pulled low, a horse tethered beside him. His eyes were the color of river rocks, steady and unreadable. He looked at her, not with possession or judgment but concern. Cyrus squared his shoulders. "This is none of your business." The cowboy looked at Rosalie. "Is he who you came here for?" She hesitated. "His name's Cyrus Bell." "He's the one who sent for me." The cowboy nodded slowly, then looked at Cyrus. "How much was the train fare?" Cyrus sneered. $28. The cowboy reached into his coat, pulled out a leather wallet, and counted bills with steady fingers. "You got a receipt?" Cyrus blinked. "What?" "You heard me." Grumbling, Cyrus dug into his coat, pulling out a crumpled envelope. The cowboy took it, checked the name, and then handed over the money. "She's not going with you." Cyrus lunged, but the cowboy stepped between them, hand resting on the butt of his gun. "You want to test me, Bell? I'll give you a reason to limp for the rest of your life." Cyrus froze, lips curling. "You'll regret this." The cowboy didn't flinch. "Go." Cyrus turned, muttering something foul, and disappeared into the crowd. Rosalie stood frozen, unsure what had just happened. "Why did you do that?" she asked. He looked at her again, gentler this time. "Because no man should buy a woman just to break her." "I don't even know your name." "Graham Pritchard," he said. "I got a ranch about 20 miles north of here. It's quiet, clean. If you need a place to breathe, I'll take you there." She blinked, tears stinging. "Why?" He shrugged. "Because I saw the look in your eyes when you stepped off that stage." He paused, voice softer. "Looked a lot like the one I had after the war." Rosalie gripped her satchel tighter. "I do not have anywhere else to go." "Well," he said, offering his hand, "then let's go home." They rode in silence at first, his horse leading the way while hers followed beside. The land unfurled around them open, wild, with patches of snow still clinging to the shaded parts of the hills. She kept stealing glances at him. He was not a man of many words, but his presence felt safe. By the time they reached his ranch, the sun had dipped behind the mountains. His house stood strong against the wide sky, modest but well kept. A corral stretched out beside it, a barn nearby with warm light spilling through its slats. He helped her down from the saddle, his hands steady at her waist. "You can take the bed. I'll sleep in the loft." "I cannot take your room." "You are not taking it. I am offering it." She followed him inside. The walls were lined with books and shelves full of tools. A kettle whistled on the stove. He poured her tea, sat across the table, and let her be quiet. "Why were you really going to marry him?" he asked after a while. She stared into her cup. "Because I thought maybe he would be kind. And I have nothing left back east. Father died last winter. No brothers. No home." Her voice broke. "I just wanted to belong somewhere." Graham nodded, his jaw tight. "You do not owe anyone your peace." She looked up at him. "Not even me," he said. That night, she lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling beams. The pillow smelled faintly of pine and smoke. Somewhere below, she could hear him moving around. Then silence. Her eyes drifted shut. In the morning, she woke to the smell of bacon. She dressed quickly, stepped into the kitchen, and found him cooking without a shirt, just suspenders over a clean undershirt. He looked up, surprised. "Good morning," he said. "Hope you're hungry." "I am," she said, sitting slowly. He poured her coffee, then set a plate in front of her. They ate in silence again, but it was not awkward. It was easy. After breakfast, he took her out to the barn. Inside, two children, twins, maybe 8 years old, looked up from a pile of hay. A girl and a boy. "My sister's kids," Graham said. "Paisley and Porter. She died 2 years ago. Their father ran off. I've been raising them since." Rosalie knelt beside them. "Hello." Porter gave a shy smile. Paisley grinned. "Do you know how to braid a horse's mane?" "I do," Rosalie said. "Want me to show you?" The girl nodded eagerly, and Graham watched as Rosalie knelt beside the pony and began to weave with gentle fingers. The twins giggled and leaned close, and for the first time in a long while, Rosalie felt something soft bloom in her chest. Graham leaned against the barn door, arms crossed, his gaze never leaving her. That night, after the children were asleep, she stepped outside. Graham was there, sitting on the porch. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "I do not understand why you did all this." He looked at her, voice low. "Because I know what it feels like to have no one. And I saw something in you that deserved more than what he was offering." Rosalie stepped closer. "You barely know me." "I know enough." She sat beside him, knees brushing. "I did not think anyone would ever look at me like that." He turned to her. "Like what?" "Like I matter." He reached out, his hand brushing hers, slow and certain. "You do." She looked at his fingers laced with hers. "What happens now?" Graham's voice was steady. "That's up to you." Rosalie looked out over the land, shadows stretching long across the fields. For once, the future did not feel like a cliff edge. She looked back at him. "I want to stay." His smile was quiet, but it reached all the way to his eyes. The snow began to melt slowly in April, curling away from fence posts and slipping off the eaves of the barn with quiet drips that marked the changing season. The days grew longer, but the wind still bit in the mornings, and Rosalie rose before the children to stoke the fire and set the kettle on. She no longer needed to ask where things were. Her hands knew the cupboards, the worn handles, the rhythm of the house. Graham returned from the fields one evening with his coat stained at the cuffs and his left boot soaked clear through. He set it by the stove without a word and stood with one hand on the mantel, warming the other. Rosalie watched him from the table, a scrap of mending in her lap. "You limping?" she asked, not looking up. "It's the creek bed near the west pasture," he said. "Softened up." Horse stumbled. "Did you go in with it?" "Up to the knee." She set the mending aside. "That's a fool's thing to keep quiet. You could have broken your leg." He glanced at her, one brow raised. "I didn't." Rosalie stood, fetched a dry towel, and knelt beside the stove to take his wet sock. "Next time you come home soaked, say something. I'll keep supper warm." Didn't want to fuss. "It's not fussing," she said. He looked down at her, the fire catching in his eyes. You always take care like this? She folded the towel over his foot. I was raised to see what needs doing. Doesn't mean I was always seen in return. There was a pause, long and full between them. I see you, Graham said. She didn't answer, but her hands pressed gently against his ankle before she stood. The next day, she took the twins out to the far fence line with a sack of nails and a hammer. The wire had sagged through the winter, and the posts leaned like drunks in a windstorm. Paisley chased after a grasshopper while Porter held the hammer out awkwardly, grimacing. I can't do it right, he said. You can, Rosalie answered, steadying his hand. You're just not used to the weight. Try again. He did, slower this time, and the nail bit into the wood instead of bending. That's it. Graham rode up a moment later with the dog trailing behind. He dismounted, watching her from under the brim of his hat. You've got 'em working, he said. Better than arguing, she replied. He crouched beside the fence post. I was thinking if you want the garden to go in before first thaw, we'll need to turn the soil next week. She wiped her brow with the back of her hand. I've never set a seed in this kind of earth. Back in Stark County, the ground was clay. Mean stuff. Here it's black loam, he said. Holds water well. Rosalie squinted at the field beyond. Then we'll need beans. Maybe some cabbage. I'll ride into town for seed on Thursday. She nodded, then turned back to the children who had started a game of tag with the dog. Their laughter carried on the wind, and for a moment, she let herself believe this might last. That night, after the dishes were stacked and the lamp trimmed low, Graham sat at the table with a small stack of worn papers. He looked up as Rosalie passed with a folded quilt in her arms. You know how to read ledgers? He asked. She paused. Yes, my father kept the books for a brickyard. I used to help him sum the accounts. He pushed the top page toward her. Winter feed cost more than it should have. I was thinking of driving cattle east come June, but I can't run the numbers straight. She set the quilt aside and sat across from him. Let me see. They worked in silence, side by side under lamplight, her finger moving along the rows while he tapped a pencil against the table. When she finished, she laid the paper flat and looked up. You'll be short if you pay for rail freight. But if you drive them yourself and sell before the Missouri, you'll clear enough to stock the barn for next winter. He nodded slowly. You're quick. I'm used to making a little stretch. Graham leaned back in his chair. You miss it? Ohio. Rosalie took a moment before she answered. Not the place, just the people I lost in it. Graham's eyes lingered on her face. You ever think about leaving here? Going somewhere new? I don't feel like I'm nowhere, she said. Not anymore. Outside, wind stirred the shutters, and the dog barked once before settling. The sound of the children breathing upstairs was soft, steady. Graham stood. I'll walk the perimeter. Snow's melting fast. Might be tracks near the chicken coop. Rosalie rose too. I'll wait up. He paused at the door. You don't have to. I know. He didn't say anything else, but she watched the set of his shoulders ease as he stepped into the night. Later, when he returned, boots muddy and cheeks flushed from the cold, she handed him a tin cup of warm cider without a word. He took it, fingers brushing hers. Nothing out there but a fox, he said. Rosalie leaned against the doorframe beside him. Then we're lucky. They stood like that for a long time, shoulder to shoulder, listening to the wind. By late May, the soil had warmed enough to take seed. Rosalie crouched in the furrowed rows behind the house, her skirts tucked up, fingers pressing kernels of corn into the dark earth. The children had gone quiet under the cottonwood, drawing shapes in the dust with sticks as Graham repaired the fence line past the barn. The land no longer felt foreign beneath her feet. A flicker of movement caught her eye. Graham, striding back across the field, his pace slower than usual. She stood, brushing dirt from her palms. "There's a man at the gate." His voice was even, but something in his eyes had gone still. She followed his gaze and saw a figure on horseback, just beyond the split rail fence. The man dismounted with stiff legs and removed his hat. He was older, with a deep crease between his brows and a travel-stained coat cinched with a leather belt. A rifle rested in the saddle scabbard. His horse looked near spent. Graham walked with her to the gate but stopped short. "Do you know him?" Rosalie squinted. "No," the stranger cleared his throat. "Name's Horace Bell. I'm looking for my cousin." Graham didn't move. "You'll need to be more specific." "Cyrus Bell," the man said. "He sent word weeks ago. Said a woman ran off with another man. Claimed she was his bride." Rosalie opened her mouth, then closed it. She stepped forward. "I was never his. I came west under false promises. Your cousin misled me." Horace looked at her, then at Graham. "I ain't here to settle his quarrels. But I had to see for myself. He's got a way of twisting stories." Graham's jaw worked. "He tried to harm her." Horace nodded once, slow. "I figured it was something like that." He shifted his weight. "He's holed up in Helena now, drinking through what's left of his pride. He won't come this far. Not if he's sober." Rosalie folded her arms. "And if he isn't? I'll make sure he stays east of the river." Horace's gaze softened, just a flicker. "You've got grit, miss. I hope you find something worth keeping." He turned back to his horse, mounted up, and rode off without another word. Graham didn't speak until the dust had settled. "You all right?" Rosalie nodded. "I didn't realize how much I still worried." "You don't have to anymore." That evening, after the sun dipped below the hills and the children had fallen asleep with dirt still smudged on their cheeks, Graham brought out a small wooden box from the cupboard. He set it on the table and opened it with careful fingers. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you," he said. Rosalie looked up from the tin of biscuits she was sealing shut. "All right." He held out a folded piece of paper. "It's a deed transfer. For half the land. If you want it." She didn't take it right away. "That's not something to offer lightly." "I know," he said. "But you've worked this place like it was yours. You've kept the children steady. You've kept me steady. I want you here, not just in the house. On the land." Rosalie sat down slowly. "You're not asking me to marry you?" "I am," he said. "But not with conditions. If you say no, I'll still put your name on that paper." She stared down at the document, then up at him. "You're not a man of many words." "No, but the ones you choose matter." He reached across the table, palm up. "So do yours." She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. "Yes." His thumb brushed the back of her wrist, and for a long moment they just sat like that, no fanfare, no grand proclamation. Only the quiet certainty of a joined life. The next morning, the barn filled with soft hammering as Porter helped Graham fashion a frame for a new chicken pen. Paisley tugged at Rosalie's apron, asking if she could gather eggs alone now. The sky had gone wide and blue, and the first shoots of green curled up through the garden rows. Rosalie carried a bucket of water back toward the porch, her steps slow, thoughtful. Graham met her halfway, took the pail without being asked. "You going to keep saying yes?" he asked, voice low. She looked up at him. "Every day." The June sun hung high, casting long shadows across the hills behind the ranch. The river had swelled with snowmelt, its banks thick with wildflowers and the sound of insects waking into summer. Rosalie stood at the window, drying her hands on a flour sack towel, watching Graham saddle the mule cart. He'd taken to bringing her along to town now, not out of need, but want, and today was the first time they'd be attending the county fair as a couple. "Paisley, don't forget your bonnet," Rosalie called. tying the last knot at the back of her own. "It's behind the stove," the girl shouted. "It got warm and I left it to dry." Rosalie stepped into the doorway, brushing loose wisps of hair behind her ear. "You let it get wet again?" "I was feeding the chickens." It slipped. Graham glanced up from tightening the girth strap. "We'll be late if we wait on her another minute." "You go ahead with Porter," Rosalie said. "I'll bring her in the cart. No sense in rushing." He hesitated, then nodded. "Don't forget the jars for the pie contest." Rosalie smiled. "They're already packed." By the time she and Paisley arrived, the fairgrounds outside Fort Benton were humming. Horses shifted in their traces, and the air held the scent of caramelizing sugar and hot dust. They found Graham near the edge of a pen where a boy was showing a pair of yearling heifers. Porter stood at his side with his hair slicked back and his shirt tucked in neater than usual. "You clean up well," Rosalie said, brushing a fleck of straw from the boy's shoulder. He grinned. "Graham let me pick out my own neckerchief." "Bold choice," she said, nodding at the bright red knot. They wandered together through stalls of hand-stitched quilts, glass beadwork, and barrels of dried apples. Graham bought a tin whistle for Porter and a length of blue ribbon for Paisley, which she immediately tied around her wrist. As the sun dipped lower, Rosalie stepped beneath the canvas tent where the pie judging was underway. She waited near the back, hands folded, trying not to fidget. Her entry, a blackcurrant pie with a brown top crust and sugared edge, sat among a dozen others on a long trestle table. A voice beside her said, "You bake like someone who's loved a kitchen her whole life." She turned. An older woman, round in the shoulders with a face lined by prairie wind, nodded at the pie. "That's yours, isn't it?" Rosalie gave a small nod. "It is." The woman leaned in, voice low. "I've been judging this fair 23 years. That's fine work. You from around here?" "Not originally." "Well, you belong now." She straightened. "Keep that man of yours close. He looked like he'd gut a steer if someone talked over you." Rosalie glanced across the grounds. Graham stood near the auction ring, one boot hooked over the lowest rail, arms crossed, watching her. Not possessive, just present. She turned back just as the judge lifted her pie and declared the winner. Applause rose around her. Someone pressed a blue ribbon into her hand, and she felt her breath catch. Later, as dusk fell and lanterns were lit, Rosalie and Graham walked side by side toward the cart. The children skipped ahead, sticky with candy and dust. "You surprised me," Graham said. "How so?" "I didn't know you could outbake half the county. I didn't know I'd care if they liked it." They stopped beside the cart. Fireflies blinked in the grasses, and the hush of the evening settled over the land. "I've been thinking," he said, "about the fall. We'll need to start the smokehouse again, and if we're serious about keeping bees, I'll have to build the frames before frost." Rosalie leaned against the rail. "Then we'd better set the hives near the orchard." "You planning to stay through winter?" She met his eyes. "I'm planning to stay through everything." He reached up and tucked a curl behind her ear, his touch gentle and certain. "Then I'll build you a kitchen twice this size come spring. Only if I get to pick the stove. You'll have your say." She smiled, and in the fading light, his hand found hers. They stood like that until the children's yawns pulled them homeward together, steady, and certain as the stars beginning to pierce the sky above. July brought heat that clung to the skin and settled in the hollows of the valley. The creek ran slower now, grass grown high along its banks, and thunderheads sometimes gathered in the distance but rarely broke. The ranch moved slower in that kind of weather. Chores finished early, animals watered more often, and the house kept shaded until evening cooled the air. Rosalie stood at the edge of the orchard, a woven basket balanced against her hip, the hem of her dress damp with dew. She reached up to pluck an early apple, still green blushed, and turned it in her hand. Graham's voice carried from the shed behind her. If we wait another week, they'll sweeten up. She glanced over her shoulder. He was leaning against the doorway, a strip of linen wrapped around his forearm. She crossed to him at once. What happened? Splinter from the fence rail. Nothing serious. Let me see. He hesitated, then unwrapped the cloth. A thin piece of wood was still lodged just beneath the surface of his skin. She guided him to the bench just inside the shed, fetched a small tin of salve from the shelf, and worked in silence, tweezers held steady. You don't flinch, she said. He looked at her, eyes steady. I trust you. Her fingers paused, just for a breath, then continued. You ever think about putting up a wind pump? The well's strong, but it'd save the horse from hauling every drop. I've been looking at parts in town, he said. I'd need help getting the tower upright. I'll help. You always say that. Because I mean it. She set the tweezers aside. Done. Their eyes held for a moment, the quiet between them full and familiar. Later that week, they rode out to the northwest ridge, where a patch of land Graham had long left fallow now whispered with grass and thistle. He dismounted and walked the perimeter, Rosalie trailing behind, her skirt brushing the tops of dry weeds. Thought this could be a good spot for a second barn, he said. Something smaller, for calves or feed. She nodded. We could use the space come spring. He turned to her. I've been thinking about that. She waited. I don't want to raise them alone anymore, he said. Not the children, not the land. I want more. With you. Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. You're asking if I'd want children? I'm asking if you'd want a family. Together. She stepped closer, her hand finding his. Yes. He drew her in, slow and sure, and kissed her beneath the wide Montana sky. It wasn't new, but it was different, less cautious now, more certain. She held his face in her hands, and the kiss deepened, the kind of promise that didn't need words. When they returned to the ranch, Paisley was sitting on the porch steps, a handful of wildflowers in her lap. I made these for your hair, she said, holding them out. Rosalie crouched beside her. You picked thistle. It's still pretty. She smiled and tucked the bloom behind her ear. Thank you. Porter appeared at the doorway holding a strip of paper. It came from the post. Graham took it, read it once, then handed it to Rosalie. It's from the county clerk. She read the letter, her eyes scanning quickly. It's done. The deed's filed. Paisley looked up. What's that mean? Rosalie folded the paper carefully. It means this land belongs to all of us now. That night, they laid a blanket in the grass behind the house. The children curled beside them, stars scattered in the sky above. Graham rested on one elbow, watching Rosalie trace constellations with her finger. You ever think you'd end up here? He asked. I didn't know where I'd end up, she said. But I prayed it'd be somewhere I could be known. You are. She turned to him. You too. His hand found hers in the dark, fingers laced without hesitation. They married quietly at the end of the summer, in the clearing behind the barn where the cottonwoods offered shade and the children strung wildflowers on twine. The preacher from Fort Benton said the words with his hands folded firm, and Graham kissed her with both palms on her cheeks, steady and sure. Afterwards, they shared bread and stew with neighbors, laughter carrying across the hills. Paisley danced barefoot through the grass. Porter tried to carve a whistle from a branch, and the sun dipped low behind the ridge as if pausing to witness something sacred. That night, when the house was quiet and the windows open to the sound of crickets, Rosalie lay beside Graham in the room they now shared. His arm was draped across her waist, his breath warm against her shoulder. Are you happy? He asked, voice low. I didn't know it could feel like this. she whispered. Like I've been walking toward this all my life. He kissed the curve of her neck, slow and lingering. You don't have to walk anymore. Years passed. The second barn was built with their own hands, the wind pump raised with help from neighbors. Rosalie planted pear trees along the southern fence, and Graham carved each child's height into the doorframe with a penknife every spring. They had a daughter the following year, born just before the first frost. She had Rosalie's eyes and Graham's quiet temperament. They named her Clara, and she grew up with her brother and sister chasing chickens and climbing hay bales, always barefoot, always laughing. Rosalie taught her to bake, just as she taught Paisley. Graham took all three children riding across the pasture at dusk, their voices rising like birdsong against the sky. They grew older in the way people do when they are loved in strength, in peace, in the quiet beauty of days well lived. And every night, after the lamps were out and the house settled into stillness, Graham reached for her hand beneath the quilt, and Rosalie held it as she always had, as she always would.